They said the line was closed and no one else was allowed inside, but the old man simply stood there with his hands shaking and his cap pressed to his chest as if he were holding the last piece of a life that mattered. The guards blocked him without hesitation. Rules were rules, orders were orders, and the ceremony for the fallen general was already underway. Yet the old man didn't argue or raise his voice. He only whispered that he needed just 1 minute, and that 1 minute held more weight than anyone there could have guessed. Nothing moved until the 4-star general at the front suddenly raised his hand and halted the entire funeral. For a moment the world paused, and every soldier, every officer, every member of the crowd turned to see why a man with the highest authority had chosen to stop everything for a stranger who had been refused at the gate. The truth behind that moment begins long before the funeral, long before the flags, the rifles, and the folded cloth handed to the grieving family. It begins with the quiet power of unseen loyalty. Loyalty is not always loud. It doesn't always announce itself or demand recognition. Sometimes it lives in the shadows of forgotten stories, carried by people no one notices until the moment comes when their voice is the only one that should be heard. The old man standing at the gate had lived a life anchored by loyalty. He had served beside the general when neither of them had rank or reputation. They walked through mud together, shared the same rations, survived nights where the only light they had was each other's resolve. And while the world had long celebrated the general's rise through the ranks, the old man never sought status. He carried his memories quietly, believing that loyalty required no audience. His journey to the funeral was not just a farewell but a final tribute to the bond that shaped both their lives. The guards did not know this history. All they saw was a man who looked too frail to matter. But loyalty does not weaken with age, sometimes it grows stronger. That day also revealed a long-forgotten truth about respect. Respect should never be measured by medals or uniforms or polished shoes standing in perfect formation. It must be measured by the weight of a person's experiences and the sacrifices hidden behind their silence. When the guards dismissed the old man, it was because they judged the surface. They saw a stranger, not a survivor. They saw wrinkles, not wisdom. They mistook age for insignificance. The error was not theirs alone. Many of us carry similar blind spots. We move fast, assume quickly, and forget that strength often hides in people who no longer announce it. The 4-star general understood this better than anyone. From the podium, he recognized the old man instantly. He remembered the stories told in private conversations, nights when they spoke about mentors and comrades who shaped their early days. He remembered the description of a man who once carried an injured young soldier for miles, refusing to let him die alone. And there he was, denied entry to the funeral of the man whose life he had helped protect decades earlier. Respect is not just about following protocol, sometimes it demands the courage to pause everything and honor the unseen. The general halted the ceremony because respect, when genuine, cannot allow silence to swallow truth. But woven through that moment was another lesson, one that many forget in a world obsessed with rank. True leadership is not about power. It is about recognition. Leadership means seeing people clearly, especially those everyone else overlooks. The 4-star general had spent a lifetime commanding thousands, yet what made him a leader in that moment was not authority but awareness. He saw the old man's trembling hands. He saw the way he held that cap as if it were a living memory. He understood instantly what others had ignored. A leader does not wait for someone to explain why a person matters. A leader senses it. A leader acts on it. When he ordered the guards to step aside and escorted the old man personally to the front row, he did more than grant access. He taught every soldier present what leadership looks like. It is the willingness to bend protocol to uphold humanity. It is the instinct to honor someone who had shaped the very foundation of the man being buried. The silence that followed was not out of confusion but reverence. They had just witnessed leadership in its purest form, the kind that does not need to raise its voice to command a lesson. The funeral became a moment of reflection for everyone who saw what unfolded. They began to understand the underestimated weight carried by people who stand on the margins of major events. The old man represented every unsung figure whose contribution never appears in history books. And when he was finally brought to the front, he stood not with pride but with grief shaped by years of memories no one else could claim. His presence taught them something profound about humility. Some people carry achievements they never speak about, battles they never brag about, and loyalties they never broadcast. Humility is not the absence of importance but the refusal to demand recognition for it. When the old man reached the casket, he didn't speak. He simply laid his hand upon it and closed his eyes. In that moment, everyone understood that humility can be louder than any speech, and deeper than any ceremony. No one asked what he had done. They didn't need to. His silence was enough. Humility teaches us to let actions stand without applause, to know our worth without needing the world to confirm it. And for the first time that day, the crowd realized that the quietest person present might have carried the greatest story. Yet a deeper lesson emerged from the tension at the gate. The guards were not cruel, they were following instructions. But following instructions without compassion can slowly erode the values armies, nations, and communities strive to protect. Compassion is the bridge that allows rules to serve people instead of control them. It does not demand that rules be abandoned but that interpretation be guided by understanding. If the 4-star general had not intervened, the funeral would have continued, and the old man's final farewell would have been lost forever. Sometimes compassion requires us to step back from rigid structures and ask a simple question: what is the human need in front of me right now? What is the cost of mercy? What is the cost of withholding it? In this case, compassion changed everything. The old man's chance to say goodbye became a moment of collective learning. The soldiers watching learned that protocols protect order but compassion protects meaning. Without compassion, the general's funeral would have been dignified but incomplete. With compassion, it became unforgettable. Compassion reminds us that people's stories deserve space even when they do not fit neatly into procedures. Finally, the event illuminated the enduring nature of legacy. Legacy is not the medals displayed, the titles engraved, or the speeches delivered. Legacy lives in people whose lives were shaped by the one being honored. The old man embodied the general's legacy more than any official record ever could. Through him we see that legacy is passed not through public ceremony but through private impact. The general's achievements were remarkable, but his legacy lived strongest in the loyalty he inspired, the respect he earned, the leadership he demonstrated, the humility he carried, and the compassion he showed. When the 4-star general halted the funeral, he was not only honoring the past, he was preserving the legacy of the man lying before them. Legacy depends on the courage of those who carry it forward, and that moment ensured it would not fade. The story of the old man being refused at the gate, only to be escorted to the front by a 4-star general, will be told long after the ceremony is forgotten. It will be remembered because it reflects the essence of what the general stood for. Legacy is never built in isolation. It is built in relationships, in sacrifices, in shared suffering and triumph. The general's legacy lived inside that old man, and by allowing him to stand where he belonged, the 4-star general ensured the world saw the truth of it. The silence that settled after the old man stepped back from the casket was different from the solemn quiet that began the ceremony. This silence carried understanding. It carried unity. It carried the recognition that the measure of a life is not found in the ceremony of farewell but in the people who refuse to let that life be forgotten. The soldiers watching had become witnesses to something greater than a funeral. They had seen loyalty survive decades. They had seen respect challenge assumptions. They had seen leadership step beyond authority. They had seen humility deepen the meaning of grief. They had seen compassion restore dignity. And they had seen legacy embodied in a single man whose presence changed the tone of an entire gathering. In that moment, as the 4-star general stepped aside and let the old man take the front seat reserved for family, everyone understood why the ceremony had been halted. It was not for protocol. It was not for rank. It was for truth. The old man had been part of the general's life long before the uniforms, long before the promotions, long before the world recognized his brilliance. And now, at the very end, that truth deserved its rightful place. The funeral continued, but something had shifted. Every person present had learned something about the values that matter when titles fade and flags are lowered for the last time. The lesson did not come from the speeches or the rituals but from the moment the general at the front said without words that humanity must always outrank formality. And so the old man, who had been refused at the gate, left the funeral not with bitterness but with peace. His final farewell had been granted, his loyalty honored, his bond recognized. And those who watched would carry the memory of that moment into their own lives, becoming custodians of the very values that defined the general they had gathered to honor.